Hey all, Dan here, and this is the second part of my video series into at.js 2.0. The first part of this video series looked at just a general overview of at.js 2.0, kind of how it works and how it differs to version 1 of at.js. In this part of the video series, I want to look at it from more a technical standpoint, looking at how we'd actually implement it, using Adobe Target and how to actually embed the trigger views function into your single page application. I have a locally hosted version of my React blog ready here, which we can see over here. It currently does not have Target on it, so we'll do a walkthrough all the way from installing the extension to configuring Target to fire on initial upload and then triggering views on URL change and then custom view changes as well. So first thing to do is to make sure that the extension is configured correctly. Pretty simple. It's just a case of going into the catalog and then finding Adobe Target version 2, which is here, and installing it. The configuration is done automatically, so there's nothing to actually do there. One key thing to take into consideration is that you will have to disable Adobe Target version 1 or version 1.71, which is what I have installed here, before actually activating at.js version 2. Once that is installed, the first thing we want to do is to make sure we can get Adobe Target version 2 to fire on initial app load. So that is pretty simple. It's just a case of actually loading Target. So this series or this video is assuming that you already have initial upload, event view end and event view start set up. These are events that are emitted from your application. Pretty simple to set up. There is a lot of documentation on how to set it up, and I cover it in a previous blog, but I'm not going to go into it here. So in order to get Target to fire on initial upload, if we just jump inside initial upload rule, and this is just set to basically fire when the library is loaded. All we want to do is just go into Actions, Adobe Target v2, and we want to load Target. So that will load the Target library. That will not actually fire anything, which is one thing to consider. When I was looking through the documentation, I missed this step, and I couldn't figure out why Target was there, but it wasn't firing. So to get Target to fire, literally just a case of back into Adobe Target v2, and then fire page load request, and that will fire Target on application load. So that is that. There is no conditions here because we're not actually filtering where we want this to fire. We want it to fire on any page if it's the initial upload. So if we save this, and it will build for my development environment of Adobe Launch. Once this has actually built, we will just look into the application and we'll just ensure that Target is making the appropriate requests. So if we just go over here now, we open up the Debugger, which can be found in the Chrome store if anyone doesn't already have it. And we give this a refresh. We'll now be able to see that we have at.js 2.1.1, and we have now a request or a call to Target. And Target is passing in our URL, which in this case is localhost 8000, but in my live application it would be optisite.co.uk/blog, which is fantastic. So we have our application loading Target on initial load, And now if we go into any other page in the application, so if we go into an article, you'll see that there has been no subsequent request. And the reason that is because due to the nature of the single page application, there is no page load. So the way Target has historically worked, and again, I've spoke about this in part 1 of this series, is that when the page reloads, Target would fire a new mbox and then pass in certain parameters. Single page app does not do that. So at.js 2.0 introduces this concept of triggering a view, which we'll look at later. But for the purposes of demonstrating what's going on now, over in Target here, I have created a couple of demo tests. So one on the actual blog homepage, which is just setting the background color to green. And then one on the blog article we are looking at, which is Implement Adobe Target Server-Side Part 4. And that also sets the background color to, is it orange? Yes, orange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set both of these live just to demonstrate how initial upload works. So now these are live. If I go back to the actual root or the home of my blog, we'll see now this renders, which is great because Target has loaded on initial app request, on initial upload, and made a request to Adobe Target, and then it's pulled back the offer and it's applied the offer, which is what you can see the green background. But obviously, if we go into read, you'll see that we do not have our orange background because the page isn't reloading and Target has not made another request. But if I was to reload this page, at that point, it would fire another request to Target and it would then pull this back. So as I've alluded to earlier, in order to get this to work seamlessly without refreshing, we need to use trigger view. Now, trigger view is a pretty basic concept. It is just basically telling Target that the view has changed or something on the page has changed. So if I go over here and I just look at this target flow for at.js 2.0 trigger view to try and demonstrate exactly what it's doing. So when the initial app loads and we load Target, it will cache all of the offers that can run on that single page application. So all trigger view does is basically, once the trigger view is made, it goes to the cache and it will find any offers that are relevant to that view and it will then apply them. So it's basically almost mimicking like a page reload, but without the reload. So how do we go about actually implementing this? So if we go back to launch, and again, we've got initial upload, event view end, and event view start. For this, we need event view start because we want Target, or the trigger view in this case, to fire before the view actually changes so that it doesn't give us any flicker or anything like that. So if we go in here, it's currently empty. Literally a case of just going into actions. Again, target v2. And this time we want to trigger a view. Now, we want to give the view a name. So in my case, I've got page name 2, which is a data element, which I'll show you in just one second. But essentially what this is doing is just populating the path of the URL. And this is what we'll use to actually target specific URLs when we are looking at launching a test or delivering an offer. Then you have this option of page. Now what page does is, if it's ticked, it will count as an additional impression. So if this is triggering on something that you classify as another page view, you would want to tick this page option. If this was just rendering something else into the same page, like a module in the bottom or something dynamic, you wouldn't consider it an additional page view. So you would then untick this page section and it wouldn't class as an additional impression. So if we save this now and we will just build, which will take just a second. While that is building, I will quickly show you my data element. I will share this in the transcript of this video, but basically all it's doing is taking the window.location.path, so the URL, it's stripping off any of the forward slashes or the hashes, and then it is delivering it back to launch to be able to use as a data element. So now we will have, providing this is built, which it has, we'll open the debugger, we'll clear the debugger so we can see what's actually happening. Now if I go back to, if I go back to my actual root of my blog, now we will get a request on initial upload, and we will get a request on every additional view start. So every time my app emits a view start or a view about to change, we will get a new server or a new target call, which will then pass in the data element that we have supplied to it. So in this case, it was localhost 8000, and then in this case, it is implement Adobe target server side part 4. So now we've implemented the trigger view based on event starts from the application. The way we actually implement tests through the VEC will actually change. If we just go back now and we jump into the blog, or the blog test, which makes the background green, you'll see you've got this page load event, which is what we've been looking at previous. But if you go to browse, you'll notice that every subsequent page now will have a view, and it'll say current view blog / implement Adobe target server side part 4, or if we go to a different page, blog / categories / demo. So all that's happening here is every time this event view start is fired, it's triggering a view, and the name is what we've passed in through that data element which we discussed earlier. But what is missing here is when this first loads, is there is no view on initial application load. So there is no view here. So what we need to do is go back into initial upload and just trigger a view the way we've done in event view start. So if we just add to the end, again, Adobe target v2, and we trigger a view, and we'll just pass in the data element same as before, and then we'll save and build this. Now, hopefully what we'll see is if we cancel out and go back, even the initial app load should have a view or a view name. So you see now current view is blog, and then every subsequent page view will have a different view, which is exactly what we want. Now, what we see here, if I just go back, is the green background that is being implemented that we've seen on here. That is a page load event. Now, that is not the way to implement tests to the VEC, because it will only load if this page is the page that the user starts on. So what we actually want to do is get rid of this and actually now change the background. Again, let's go for grey this time. And you'll see this time it sits underneath blog. So what it's saying is only render this change if the view is blog. So if we save this, go into our second test, and again we see the page load event, but we don't want to use that, so we'll delete that and we'll change the background here again. And now it will go underneath the view, which is blog/implement Adobe target server side, and we'll save this. Now if we go back and we launch this, we see the grey background. Now what you'd expect to see now within our views is when we move forward, the background to change on the next page, but it doesn't. And there's a reason why this doesn't work, and it's because of the way that in the initial target load, it caches the potential offers. So from the first URL we used, which was this one here, it only caches the offers that are relevant to this page. But if we go back and we look at this blog article here, for example, we've set the URL to localhost 8000/implement Adobe target server side part 4. So it does not actually match on initial upload because the URL is localhost 8000. So what you need to do for every VEC offer, you need to make sure that it can render on every page the user can potentially land on. So the easiest way of doing this is just to take the domain. So now if we just add in here a template rule and we just say URL contains and the domain, and bear in mind you only need the domain because you've still got the views to filter on. You don't actually need to use URL or anything like that. And then we move forward, and then we save this. So now, once this syncs, when we go to the blog homepage, which is this one, it should cache the experience for this page, but it should now also cache the experience for the implement Adobe target server side part 4 page. So if that's synced, which it is, we'll refresh this, and now in theory it should let us see the grey background and then the red background, which is brilliant. Then we go back, we get grey, forward, we get red. So this is one of those gotchas that you just need to get into your head, that it's only on the application load here on Adobe target load target and Adobe target file page load request does the offer actually get cached. So you need to make sure that the offers that you generate in the VEC can be applied to any URL. So like I say, the easy way and what the documentation recommends is just to put the domain in there as the URL targeting, and then use the views to get down more specific with how you actually render to certain pages, as we've shown here. So at this point we've got to a application that will load target on load to any page. It will then trigger views on every page, and it will pass in, based on the URL, a page name, which we can then use for views, which is great. The next step to this, and what you find in single page applications, is you find content like this, where the content is actually dynamic. So until I drop down, this content does not actually exist in the DOM. So it doesn't exist. You can't actually get to it. So there is no way of actually firing a test, because if you fire it when the page loads, so say we want to make the background of this blue, for example, if that was to fire on page load when that element isn't there, it obviously can't make the background blue. But we don't have a trigger or a view in order to identify when this actually happens. So there's two ways of doing this. So the first one is done through Adobe Target, and it's actually relatively simple. And it is literally just a case of going into your rules and setting up a new rule, and we'll call it author expand in this case. And all we do is we add from the core library a click event. So now all we have to do is find the CSS selector of the element, which in this case is MD collapse. Then just paste that in here, keep those changes. Then off the back of that, fire a trigger view. This time, call it expand author. We will not tick the view because we don't want it to be an impression, because it would not be something I would class as a page view. And then we'll save this. And once this is built, we can then test in Target whether that view is being fired based on a click on that element. Let's just try that now. So if we go back to blog article test, you'll see we'll get our first view. Which makes the background red. And when we click here, you see we now get expand author. So then what we can do in expand author is then compose, make the background our blue color that we want, and that will wait till the expand author view has been fired, i.e. wait till the element exists before firing it. So then the element will be there and the background will change to blue. So if we just test this, get a red background, and when this exists, it turns blue, which is exactly what we want. Now, this does work, and it will work for quite a few use cases, but if elements are completely dynamic and you don't actually know what the selectors of them are going to be, then it can become difficult. That's where the third way of firing target, which is in-app, is the only way forward. It's the most powerful, but it's the most dev heavy. So we'll cover that off now. So I'm going to use this same section here to demonstrate. So what I want to do here is just quickly go into here, and I want to actually just disable this. Which I can't do yet. now author expand is disabled, if we go back to the application and refresh, we still get our red background, but we no longer get the blue background because we now disabled the author expand trigger view. Now imagine this component here was completely dynamic, so I would not know what the CSS selector was going to be or the position on the page. The way to still make trigger view work is to physically embed it in the application. It's not difficult, but it does require some developer resource. This is my React application. More specifically, this is the component that renders this author section here. I have added some code to it in order to make it fire the correct trigger view. Now, I'm not going to talk through it top to bottom. I'm going to talk through it in kind of in order of execution. So when the page loads, I have created a state or an object, whatever you want to call it, called author expand. And author expand is blank when the application initially loads. I've also set a click handler on the event of expand a click. So when anyone clicks this, it will fire the function called handle click. The handle click function up here, it creates a new promise, and the reason it's in a promise is to make sure that the state is updated before the target view is called. Without that, it's possible that the view is called before the state is updated, so it would fire the wrong view and the test would run in the wrong place. So the promise makes sure that the state is updated before the target view fires. So inside the promise, what happens is the state of author expanded is toggled between true or false. And once that is done, there is a call to the function target view, and it passes in a parameter of a string, which is author expand plus the state of author expand, the object up here, which can only be true or false. So it will pass into the target view function either author expand true or author expand false. Up here is that function, which is just copied directly out of the documentation, the target documentation. And what it does is it's basically passing in the view name, which in my case can only be author expand true or author expand false. It's checking if the trigger view function is available on the page, and if it is, it's then triggering a view with the specified parameter that was passed into the function. Now, as a bit of a visual demo of this, now if I open up Developer Tools, select my element, go to React Dev Tools, and then I find the component. We have author expand, and then as it's selected, it will turn to author expand true, author expand false. So every time this button is clicked, which is this expand handler here, then this function is called, which sets the state to either true or false, and then that is passed off to target to create a trigger view based on that name. So click it, function runs, it's true, click it, function runs, false. And we can see what's being passed to target right now. If we just put console.log, and we'll just pass in this here, which is what we pass into target, which is just author expand plus the state. Now, every time we expand this, you can now see author expand true, author expand false, author expand true, author expand false. And like I said, that's exactly what's being passed into this trigger view here, and that's what the view name will be created as in target. So if we look at this and we just go back into this blog here, now when we load the page and we go to browse, when we expand this, the view will either be author expand true or author expand false. So in author expand true, we can now make, and go back to compose, we can now make this yellow, and if you wanted, you could also do author expand false, and you could then, if you wanted, compose and do something else on that trigger as well. Now if we go forward and we just put this live, we'll quickly just refresh our application, get rid of the dev tools. Now we'll get our yellow, and then when that collapses, this will become green. So this is false, this is true, it's false, it's true. So basically, every time the expandable is expanded, this handle click function will fire. It will change the state of author expand to true, and that will fire our target view. And that is kind of it for how you would implement this actually within your application. It will vary massively depending on your application, but the premise is the same. Somehow you just need a trigger, which in my case is clicking on that author expand, which then you then pass off into a function to supply a value, which in my case is author expand true or author expand false, and then you just pass that to the target function. It's basically those 3 steps, but like I say, depending on your application, it will differ. There is one more thing to cover up before I conclude this video. It's around A for T tracking. So if I open up the debugger, it's going to reload our page. Just clear everything here so we can see better. If I reload this, get back in our test, 2 requests from target. Those 2 requests have an SDID ending in 2018. Now, the reason we have 2 requests here is because one of those is the page load request, one of those is the trigger view request. Now, in order for A for T to work correctly, the SDID, or the supplemental data ID, needs to be consistent and shared between analytics and target. So these 2 end in 2018, which is correct, and this one ends in 2018, which is also correct. So up to now, everything's fine. Where this falls down is when we start to navigate to other pages. If I go to demo and then implementation, I'll create 2 more calls to target because we've triggered 2 more views, and they share the same SDID 2018 as the first 2 calls. Now, that's not good because Analytics has now a different SDID. So Analytics is updating its own SDID, which is correct, but it should be shared with what's in Adobe Target, and it isn't. Now, looking at the Adobe documentation, it's a pretty simple fix. So under the section that says use trigger view to ensure that A for T works correctly with at.js 2.0 in single page apps, you have this bit here. Now, visitor.getInstance returns the visitor instance that we're using in our application. And normally an SDID would be updated each hit when the page reloads, but because we're in our single page application, there is no reload to do that. So this function, this visitor.resetState function, it mimics the same thing, much like the way trigger view mimics a page view. Reset state mimics a page view to create a new SDID. To implement this is pretty simple. Literally a case of just copying it, going into our event view start, adding new custom code, pasting it in, then adding the correct marketing cloud ID, and then give that a save. One thing to note here is this must be before the trigger view. And now if we save and build this, and once this is built, what we expect to see is on initial upload the same as what we saw before, but as we navigate through the site, hopefully we see the SDID updating to mimic analytics. So let's give it a go. Let's just go to one of our blog pages. We'll clear everything out. We will reload this. And we get our same two requests, which end in 93D. And this ends in 93D. And if we just navigate, as we did last time, to demo and then implementation, we create these additional two requests, which have the ending 73D on this one and F49 on this one. And then if we just check those with what we have here, and then we see our third request to target ends in 73D, and that lines up with our second request to analytics, and then this last one, F49, lines up with this fourth call to Adobe Target. So that's it. That will ensure that all the data that is collected through any testing in your single page application is sent through to Adobe Analytics correctly. That's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.